today. I appreciate it's always a busy time, so Carly and I are very grateful for your time, and also as a partner of Cubo, we're delighted to have been invited to talk with you today. I'm very much looking forward to it. So, as Sarah mentioned, Carly and I are both partnership managers at Endsleigh Insurance. Together, we've got 25 years of experience of working across the sector and within Endsleigh. And the purpose of today really is to share some key student insights with you on a range of products we support students, universities and accommodation providers with, but particularly focusing on some insight around our student wellbeing assistance programme, which we're looking forward to covering with you. As a little disclaimer, between Carly and I, we do have 4 dogs both working from home today in the background, looking quite peaceful at the moment, but they tend to, if they do set off, it sets the other one off. So if they do, apologies in advance, but it will only be a slight disruption. So our presentation will last roughly 30 minutes. And as Sarah said, please do ask as many questions as you have at the end, or feel free to pop them in the chat box if that's easier for you. So just looking at the people attending today, we can see many universities and partnerships that we have. But just to test our polling really that we've got for our insight piece later on, we do have our first poll, and we just wanted to get an understanding really of what products or services have any of you got experience with of working with Endsleigh in the past, if any at all? So you should see a poll just popping up now. You can see. Brilliant. Yes. So thank you, Carly. I think we've got that going, haven't we? So yeah, real mix there of people from working with us on the accommodation side, or some already working with us on the wellbeing provision, which is great to hear. And we meet many people who were insured by Endsleigh when they were a student, which is great to hear as well, that sort of we're still recognised in that sense. So if we really kind of go on to our purpose really, so to provide you with an overview, if you could just click next on the slide, please, Carly. There we are. So for those of you, I saw a couple of you don't actually work with Endsleigh or haven't engaged with Endsleigh before. So for those of you not familiar with us, we were actually founded over 50 years ago and actually set up by the National Union of Students. So back then, no one was able to insure students. They weren't able to get a fair deal to protect themselves. And the National Union of Students created Endsleigh, and our name very much comes from Endsleigh Street, which we were located at in London in the time. And we very much have kept that partnership with the NUS through to today, even though they no longer own us. Their president sits on our board. And as you can see, throughout many areas of the education sector, we are fully integrated into the student movement, really. So starting with the bottom, in the last 4 years, students have actually voted for us Best Student Insurer for the last 4 years in a row at the Insurance Choice Awards. We are now proud to partner with over 380 accommodation providers, where over 500,000 students are actually automatically insured via their university or their accommodation provider, and that includes 85% of universities. And we are actually also really proud to insure over 95% of students' unions, so their activities, their liabilities, but things like their sports clubs and their societies, where we provide personal accident insurance to those students. Roughly 300,000 students protected there. And 3 years ago, we're very proud to co-develop our first student assistance programme, which we now partner with over 55 universities and colleges, and that protects over 370,000 student lives. And it's very much through those partnerships and through our heritage of working with the NUS, we started to ask ourselves, how do we as an organisation play our part in the challenge of wellbeing that the sector has very much faced and has grown over the last few years? So if we look to sort of some of the key areas that we're proud of, we're actually working with the NUS and organisations. We're really proud to be the first insurance company to actually really do the right thing and have a first in a number of key areas effectively. So firstly, around that block insurance product that I mentioned, 35 years ago, if you were a student going to university or student accommodation, you generally wouldn't have been provided with any insurance automatically. We actually founded that product and now provide that to over 500,000 students. We're the first insurance organisation to offer same-sex couple pension rights and benefits, the first insurance organisation to actually protect international students as well. And that's very much, we're very proud as to be a leading insurance broker that's actually playing its part to support student well-being, really. So through those relationships, through those partnerships, we've asked how we can support that. And not only is it through those relationships and those partnerships, many of you who are on the call today, we actually underpin all of our product development and support with insight. So an insight-led approach is very important. We do focus groups, surveys, conferences. We commission research throughout the years to make sure that our products are relevant for today, for today's students, and also for tomorrow. And we're going to share with you some of that insight today. So if we start really with a first bit of insight, which is that kind of accommodation insurance, really. So very proud to be insuring halls of residence for the last 35 years. And I suppose when we think of student well-being, you know, a theft of a possession or an incident in your room, like a fire or a flood, you know, may have a real impact on a student's mental health, student experience at university, or their general well-being. So again, we're asking ourselves, how do we make sure these products provide not just the support to get a student back in the position that they were if they experience a loss, but provide that emotional and ongoing support as well. But going back to our polling, over the last 3 years, which of the following types of loss do you think is the most common experienced within student accommodation? Theft, fire, flood, or that should be accidental damage as one. So if you just click either accidental or damage, that's accidental damage. So thank you for your answers there. I think yeah, the majority of you got that right there. So it is actually probably not a surprise to many of you that students breaking things or damaging the fixtures or fittings within accommodation is the most common reason or the most common type of claim we experienced within student accommodation in the last 3 years. And you can just see the pie chart there that makes that up. Now, just some other key insights, really. I saw a number of you put theft closely behind there. Actually, 1 in 2 theft claims within student accommodation come as a result of non-forced entry theft, which is a student hasn't locked the door or there's no sign of forced entry. And with Endsleigh cover, the cover still very much applies. So if a student has friends over, is having a party and a possession goes missing, it's designed to protect them in that instance. So 1 in 2 actually is when they haven't, there's no sign of a forced entry or they haven't locked the door. Claims, typically, the majority of them happen in the first 2 months of the academic year, so predominantly around September and October. And that kind of stresses the importance, really, of Endsleigh and partners working together to be providing those messages for students to keep themselves and their possessions safe and secure. Over the last three years, obviously, we've been living in a pandemic, but we have seen a kind of material increase, really, in what we would call large incidences, where a large number of students are impacted by one incident, so a large flood or a fire within the accommodation. And this really kind of came to head in late 2019, just before the pandemic, where a major fire in student accommodation in Bolton, we actually insured that accommodation. 200 students were impacted, and £750,000 worth of possessions were protected, and we actually came onto campus face to face to settle those claims all within a matter of days. So again, that's made us ask ourselves, how do we provide and support partners with not just settling claims, but providing that aftercare support in events like that, really. And finally, many of you, I can see, work within accommodation, would have experienced packing away student possessions or keeping them in storage while students weren't able to return to accommodation. No surprise that that really meant that last year we saw a real spike in accidental loss of contents claims, which is basically where a student possession has been misplaced, the accommodation provider has misplaced it, accidentally disposed of it, and therefore there's an element of cover generally on the policy that can protect for those instances. Moving on to a key area of insight is our Student Happiness Index. So in 2021, really proud to partner with the National Union of Students to launch and commission our first ever Student Happiness Index. And we had 2,500 students engage with us on this, where we reached out to them to understand effectively how happy they were, how optimistic they are, and what issues they're concerned about now and in the future. And we plan to run this every year going forward. Now, we have a full report on this. It's 35 pages long. So Carly and I won't go through all of that today. But if you would like access to that report, then drop us a comment in the notes box or follow up with us after this, and we'd be happy to share that with you. So we're just going to share some headlines from it really today. So challengingly, in 2021, only 23% of students actually considered themselves as happy. And probably more challengingly as well, 49% of students actually expressed that their university experience wasn't in line with their expectations that year. And interestingly, there also seems to be quite a sharp decline in happiness after students are in their first year, and particularly after those students have lived in halls of residence, which is probably not a surprise with the sense of community and safety and security that comes with living in halls of residence. But typically those students were happiest when they were first year undergraduates living in halls compared to their peers. And I suppose having that student support to students consistently transitioned outside of halls into second, third year and into the private sector is a key challenge for all of us, I think, in the sector. It's probably no surprise that when we look at COVID and the impact, mental health is a key area of concern that students stated that they needed support with. But I also think, interestingly, that financial well-being is very much prominent with students' concerns and areas that they say is their top concern. So when looking at the impact of COVID-19, you can see mental health is ranked as the top concern. And Carly is going to spend some time talking to you again how we've used this research to develop a student assistance program over the last several years. And when we look outside of the pandemic last year, we asked students what has caused them the most concern or anxiety outside of COVID-19. And you can see a range of issues, but materially, really, the top three are around racial equality, climate change, and women's safety. And it ranges all the way down to Megxit, the Harry and Meghan situation, which also was an area of concern for a number of students. But that's our Student Happiness Index, and we'd be delighted to share that full report with you after this session. I'm now going to hand you over to Carly, who's going to give you an overview of the Student Assistance Programme before we come back and share with you a little bit more insight into actually how students have been engaging with that. And there's a few more polls at that point.
Thanks, Bill. So Billy mentioned earlier about Endsleigh are very proud to launch some of the firsts into the sector and into the market, such as our international student provision, our block provision. And what we wanted to do a number of years ago is we took a bit of a step back from the traditional student insurances, and we went into the sector to do some research insight to understand how we could be known as further than just an insurance provider for students, how we could be known as more of a protector. And we spoke, as Billy's mentioned, insight really forms a lot of the direction of our products and services, and that is so true for the wellbeing products that I'm about to talk to you about now. We commissioned a lot of different research companies. We spent a number of times out in the market speaking with wellbeing teams, a whole heap of different varieties of roles across both HE and the FE sector. And we very much went with a blank piece of paper to understand what these challenges were. We really wanted to understand where we could support. And the overwhelming feedback that we had was around the increase in demands and needs for wellbeing provisions at a university and/or colleges. So at that time, we took a step back and we decided that actually alleviating some of those pressures was definitely something that we wanted to support the sector with. Obviously, Endsleigh are an insurance broker predominantly, so we needed to go out into the market ourselves to find a partner to be able to provide this support for us. And we've worked very closely with our service provider to co-develop something that we feel is really fit to launch into the student sector. When we were looking at different service providers for this support, we were very much aware that we didn't want to take anything away from the amazing jobs that student wellbeing teams within universities already do. So we wanted something to truly dovetail into the own provisions, services, and to complement and support the infrastructure that's already in place. But where we felt we needed to really support with alleviating pressure was reducing wait times for a student to speak with a counsellor for more structured sessions, but also that out of hours provision. So when your teams go home, and when, for example, especially for residencies, when students are only, have maybe a security member, a staff member to speak with, what we could do to really bridge that gap to make sure that is that 24/7, 365 provision in place for students to reach out to at any point. So I want to give you an overview today of our student assistance programme. Billy's already mentioned we're very proud to partner with around 55 universities and colleges who have rolled this out across their student body, supporting, like I said, with their own in-house teams as well. But the provision that we have launched, we've been live with now for the best part of 2 years, is the student assistance programme. Now, this is access unlimited to a 24/7 helpline for students to call 365 days a year. When your teams aren't there, we are there to answer the phone. And very differently to a number of charities services, this is staffed by BACP accredited counsellors. We also were very, very keen to make sure that the phone lines were only ever staffed in the UK. So anytime a student calls up for a helpline to speak with someone, they are speaking to someone in the UK and they are a trained professional counsellor. So from a residency's perspective, there's an element of an additional duty of care that you have, students living in your halls. This could really provide that extra support for your students. I mentioned earlier around there's only a certain amount of time that staff can be on site, residential life managers, security. Not every one of those staff members may be mental health trained or support trained, but you may see a student that you come across that you're a bit concerned about. But not all students are confident enough to reach out directly and pick up the phone and make a phone call. So what we've developed as part of our service is we've introduced a referral element to the service, which means that if you come across a student that you are maybe a little bit concerned of, it does fall out of those hours, core hours, that maybe your own student wellbeing teams aren't around. You could complete an online referral form And then one of our teams will then give that student a call back as well. So it really provides that joined up approach from the university into our services and vice versa. And I'll go on in a minute to talk about how we really integrate and make sure it is an extension of your service and to complement what you already have. We deal with a number of universities with international students. It's obviously a growing space within the sector, and I'm sure you've all got a number of international students living in your residences as well. And where this is an additional support is that we can also provide a translation services in over 200 different languages. Again, something that we found wellbeing teams really struggled with, because wellbeing teams only have a certain demographic of counsellors and generally speaking will only be English speaking. In addition to that, we can also provide hard of hearing support for deaf students, meaning that again, we're really supporting with that inclusivity support. As well as having the phone line to access, the students have access to a whole heap of resources through an app, as well as an online portal. Through the app, the students can actually access a live chat facility. So some of you might work with other app platforms already. The difference with our app platform is the fact that, again, when they are having a text conversation, if that's a more comfortable way for them to interact with the service, it is actually a counsellor on the other end that they are speaking with, as opposed to peer-to-peer or a robot. One thing that I also want to highlight to you, I've got a slide in a moment, is actually how we elevate and escalate services that are presenting as risk, because every call that comes through, we do go through a triaging process, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a moment. But we have, what I've given you there, I suppose, is a very much a whistle-stop tour of our services. There are multiple different elements. It can be bespoke, etc. But the helpline element, I suppose, with the app is the core to the services, which could then be extended to include structured counselling sessions of short-term solution-focused therapy for either face-to-face video or call, or for a conversation over the phone. What I mentioned a moment is our at-risk process, and I thought this was something that was really, really beneficial to call out for in this forum today, because like I mentioned earlier, of the duty of care that you do have for students living within your residences, and how we would then, if a student calls through, like I said, we would triage that call to ascertain the level of risk that that student is presenting. That then will allow us to decide what action is required on that call. Students can call through for a whole heap of reasons. They might just call through because they can't sleep. They've got an exam the next day, they're struggling, tossing and turning. They just need to get things off their chest. But then we also do have the other end of the spectrum, where students are potentially putting themselves at risk, or have suicide ideations, are considering taking their own life. And in which case, again, because we are trained professionals, we have an intervention service, meaning that we will intervene. We will contact emergency services directly. We will also maybe work collaboratively with yourselves. We might speak with your residences managers. We might speak with your security to let you know that an ambulance is coming onto site. With all of that happening in the background, what we also need to make sure that at the forefront of our mind is that that student is going to be put into a place of safety, and we will stay with them during the whole of that phone call to make sure that they are in the best possible care. And we will only finish that call when either a member of your team are with that student or emergency services have taken over. One of the elements that we have developed, we worked very closely at the start when we first started to launch this service with the University of Manchester. And one element that we've developed very closely with them is how we then communicate those risk students back into your services. Ultimately, if we've had emergency services come onto site, you would want to know the next day who that student was, how we supported them, and then we will label that care to then go over to yourselves. So we will provide you with a report following the situation once the counsellors had time to debrief, which will then allow you, like I said, a password protected email giving you the information about that student so that you can then take over that care for that student. I've mentioned a lot there around how we will integrate with your services. We might have to contact your residential teams. We might have to speak to your security to let them know that an ambulance is coming on site, for example. But what we will also do is we will have a number of meetings with you ahead of going live on a service like this to really understand the setup of the university, the setup of your residences, so that we are almost an extension of your service, but we can refer back into what you have available for that student. So it does feel like it's an extension, it's dovetailed into what you already do. But also from our side of things, we want to know what is available for students, and also who you want us to escalate these calls to if there is a certain situation at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, for example. And we work very closely with you in collaboration to make sure that that is the smoothest journey as possible for students. So as I've mentioned, we've had the services, we've been talking to universities, colleges about this service now for 3, maybe 4 years, but we've been live for the best part of 2.5 years. Bill is just going to go through now some of the insight that we found and we're learning from the experience of having this service live across universities.
Thanks, Carly. Yeah, so as Carly's given you an overview of what it actually is, that insight's so important. So we're just going to share some key insights really in how the student assistance program has actually been engaged with in the last 2 years, and this helps us not only obviously understand how it's going, but we're able to identify trends and use these insights to help shape future developments really, and understand what other areas that we can support with. So again, we've pulled out some headlines here, but we'd be happy to share even more with you after today if anyone would like that. So just to start, another time for a poll. Over the last 2 years, which of the below areas do you think is the most common reason a student has actually telephoned the helpline requiring support? Which of those do you think is the most common? And the counsellors obviously will categorise where these calls fall into from their side. Thank you. I think that's everyone. So yeah, overwhelmingly then we can see you've all picked anxiety, and that's absolutely right. So as you can see there, 31% of calls were actually for anxiety. Low mood and depression were also very common reasons, but particularly in the last 12 months, we've seen an increase in calls around bereavement, eating disorder, self-esteem and relationships as well. And not only can the students use this for emotional support and support in these areas, but there are practical advice lines as well where the student can get legal support and other practical areas of support that kind of go hand in hand with this really. So if we look at the next area around demographics, so another poll, and I think this is the penultimate one. Which demographic of the below has the highest engagement with the student assistance program? So has effectively, called the line the most or needed the access to the counselling? Thank you, and for your answers there. And yeah, again, the majority of you are right there. So this is the breakdown of the demographics of who is actually engaged with the assistance program. And expectancy for some of you, that doesn't come as a surprise, and perhaps it demonstrates the need for us to be thinking about additional ways in which we can actually engage encourage non-females to be using the program really, and seek and get the support that they need. As Carly did mention, if anyone does have access to this and the student is hesitant to take that first step to reach out, then actually universities and accommodation staff can refer them into the service, and we've seen an increase in that over the last year, which has really helped partners. But also trying to vary the ways in which students can get support, so live chat, callbacks, requests, and we've even launched video calling, which is very popular with students as well, for support there, so not just relying on just a telephone line basically. And then if we look at the next area, I think this is our final poll. What percentage of calls to the student assistance program are made out of hours? And out of hours, I mean, outside your 9 to 5 and on weekends. I thought we were about to get a full house there, but still a variety, and all opting for the higher percentages there. And yeah, interestingly, 64% of calls are actually made out of hours and at the weekends. That's actually risen over the last year as well. That was kind of at around 45%. So that has only increased. So it demonstrates the importance of having an out of hours provision, especially through those key holiday periods like Christmas, Easter, and other periods where out of hours support is really, really needed. 1 in 5 calls received in the last 2 years have actually been considered to be high risk. So that means the bespoke risk processes that Carly talked you through were actually activated, and an intervention service was put in there. So again, as Carly mentioned, we work collaboratively with universities and other organisations to make sure your students are supported in there. And then, probably not surprisingly, when we link it back to our happiness index findings earlier, that 70% of calls to the service are for mental health issues as well. So that brings us to the end of our time today. We hope you found that insightful. As mentioned, appreciate that we've only given you some kind of tip of the iceberg stuff from some of our insight there. We've got reports and a whole raft of data and content from various workshops and surveys that we'd be happy to talk you through in more detail. But that really helps underpin all of our product development and the way in which we support partners. If you'd like that full happiness index report, or you'd be interested in supporting us with it in the future and the NUS, then just drop us a line as well. And if you'd also like to understand further about how we may be able to support your wellbeing provision, then please drop us a note in the chat or follow up on email as well. But now's a time for questions, really, and Carly and I would be happy to take any if you do have any.
Has anybody got any questions? It's very, very interesting presentation. I think it's really kind of interesting to see the different kind of different sort of feedback that you've managed to gain from the survey, and I think it's it's really interesting how things have kind of changed and how people's kind of perceptions of who will be contacting the line is kind of in keeping with what's actually happening in reality as well.
Mm.
Just anybody got? Oh, here we are, Colette.
How many of the really large? We'll start that. Have any of the really large PBSA providers got on board with this?
Yes, we already have started working with a number of our PBSA providers. So yeah, yeah, we work.
No, I was just curious because I've got other bigger ones seem to want to develop their own programs, but from the sounds of it, this seems to be working exceptionally well for a number of universities. So it's reinventing the wheel numerous times when it's not needed.
Yeah, I think PBSA in particular, it's definitely been something that has had quite a quick uptake. Obviously, generally speaking, they don't necessarily have their own in-house provisions, or as you said, they may be trying to recreate the real, and actually it's just been easier to put something like this in place. And having that out of hours, as obviously I mentioned earlier, your duty of care when students living in one of your residences is a lot higher than someone living in the private sector, for example. So yeah, it's been something that's had a really good uptake and is growing quite fast.
Brilliant, thank you.
Has anybody else got any questions for Billy and Carly? Following on from their presentation.
I've potentially got one. I came on the video call so that you realise there was actually people that you're presenting to, and I know how difficult that can be. So I guess I'm attending today's session. I'm Director of Sport and Deputy Director of Commercial Services, so I'm coming at this from a very different angle. And I suppose one of the things around, there was one of the slides that was talking around the mental health, I think, was around about 40%, and the physical health was about 10%. Have you done any work around trying to bring those two things together? So using physical interventions to positively impact on mental health. Have you done any work around that?
Yes, so as part of the student assistance programme, there's an app that complements it, and through the app, as a student would download it, they've got a selection of areas that they can select to basically create their own algorithm as to what subjects they're most interested in. But on the app, there's also how to eat healthily, also working, and one of the areas we're developing is, most recently we've included breathing techniques, but we're looking at doing exercise classes, yoga, etc., as a complementary element to the app, because as you said, it definitely goes hand in hand with improvement of mental health when you do exercise. So yeah, it's something that's changing and developing all the time.
Great, thank you.
We've had a question pop up into the chat there as well from Lisa Ravenscroft. She says, how have you found engaging with security teams and wellbeing teams, and has it been easy to get a joined up approach from them?
Wellbeing teams, very much so. I suppose there's two elements. There's the wellbeing team that absolutely is incredibly receptive to this service because of the fact that they are under so much pressure at the moment, and as I've mentioned, we've put this in place to alleviate challenges and pressures, etc. We do also have some elements of maybe counselling teams that are a bit nervous about bringing an external provider in, more so because they're worried about losing their own jobs and us replacing that. And one of the elements that I spoke about earlier and is around signposting, embedding, and all of this, about when we set up the service, I spend quite a bit of time, if I do work with a partner, having an onboarding session, I suppose we kind of call it, with teams to make sure that they are truly understanding of the service, to kind of buy into it and to become advocates themselves, because what we may be speaking to one or two people when we're kind of introducing this service into a university, but what we want them to know as well is we really are not here to take your jobs away from you, because there's always going to be a need for wellbeing teams on site, 100%. We are here to make their lives a little bit easier, if anything, because there are some universities we work with who may only have the helpline element. But then there's also some universities who have more structured sessions because they haven't either got the amount of counsellors or they haven't got the facilities to be able to speak to everyone that they want to. So it's really tailoring it to what works with them. With regards to the security teams, I think there's an element of support that we can provide. So as part of the service, if a security member, for example, calls or sees a student that's in distress and is concerned about them, they can also call the phone line themselves for some support, so they can reach out to us to understand how it might be best to deal with that student, etc. So it's also extending the provision, I suppose, to helping them as well in the moment with a student, especially if they don't know how best to handle it. So I hope that answers your question. It's a bit of a waffly kind of response. I could talk about this all day, so I've given you such a whistle-stop tour. I'm sorry.
I think Alana's got her hand up if you want to ask.
Yeah. So have you launched in any universities where they already have like a separate external partnership with another external provider? So for example, we have a 24-hour wellbeing support line with a external provider. So that's my first question. And if so, how do you kind of market that to students in terms of having two external providers that can provide support? So, you know, a wellbeing support line versus student assistance program, which, you know, I always think, you know, of employee assistance programs and think about the breadth of assistance that is often given in employee assistance programs, but obviously it's a bit more of a narrower focus for a student lens. So yeah, two sort of questions there.
Yeah, I think good point, because there are a lot of employee assistance programs out there, and that's one of the reasons that our service, I think, has been as successful as it has, because we've brought the student, we've been able to speak about insurance, the most dullest subject, to students for the last 50 years. If we can make that exciting and get students involved with that, that's the element that we've brought to the student assistance program to make it relevant. And there have been other providers that maybe haven't necessarily thought of it from a student perspective and thought the employee assistance program is okay to then roll out to students, but you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We have seen, you know, even with some of we've tweaked so much over the last 2 years, because students can be resistant to things like this, and if the messaging isn't quite right, you're automatically not going to have the utilization that we want you to. So yes, we will work alongside other providers, absolutely, but then equally we don't ever want there to be conflict.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think, yeah, I think it's interesting. So where we have like an external provider and it's marketed as a student wellbeing support line, obviously wellbeing, you know, kind of narrows that focus, and sometimes that encourages students to engage and sometimes it doesn't. But actually, you know, that provider also works outside of the higher education sector. So it's interesting to hear that obviously Endsleigh, obviously with it being sort of dedicated for students, to know that, you know, you can always kind of look at it through that more tailored lens. So that's really helpful.
I think that's why we're so different. We work very closely with our service provider and are providing, we have regular meetings to make sure we are massively ahead of the curve. Like we're doing stuff at the moment to support the Uni Mental Health Day on Thursday, and things like that, to make sure it is very much aligned with the pressure points of the academic year for students and things like that. And our phone line is a dedicated student assistance program phone number.
Really interesting. Thank you very much. Has anybody else got any questions there for Billy and Carly? So all of silence. Well, I just wanted to thank you both for today's session. I think it's been really insightful to see kind of the information that Endsleigh have been able to produce based on the wellbeing support line that you've got. And I think what I'll do following on from the call is I will share the presentation with everybody, and I will send a follow-up email with Billy and Carly's contact details. As they've already mentioned, if you would like to have a copy of the happiness report, obviously you can reach out to them. You will find a copy of the happiness report on the members portal for university members of CUBO as well. So we have got a copy on there for you to refer back to as well. I'll just double check if anybody else has got any last minute questions at all. No? Well, thank you so much. It's been a great presentation, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for your
Thanks,
time, everyone.
Lovely to meet you all.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.